So this is the story of Norm and I's trip across England from Newcastle to Carlisle, following the path of Hadrian's Wall. This story kind of picks up after our trip to Portugal and our biking with Becky and Helen and Lynn, and they went on to do the Cotswolds, which was last week. And we went a bit further north, Castle upon Tyne, which is just beneath the Scottish border. You can see a map of Newcastle in the east and Carlisle in the west. We walked 137 kilometers officially, and an additional, we also did this little bit in red as well, which was Hadrian's bike path, which takes you to a Roman fort in South Shields. So it was, what I measured was about 150 kilometers across from east to west. We finished in a place called Bowness on Solway. It's near Carlisle, and we walked all the way from Carlisle to Bowness, about 25 kilometers on our last day. Created by Hadrian, I think in AD 122, the Roman Emperor Hadrian built the wall. It's a stone wall with large ditches in front of it and behind it that cross the whole width of the island. And soldiers were garrisoned along this line of the wall in large forts, smaller mouthhouse and turrets, which we visited, especially the turrets. We saw several along the way. In addition to the wall's defensive military role against the tribes in the north, it had gates and custom posts controlling the trade between the northern tribes and the southern lands controlled by the Romans.
The whole purpose of the wall was it theoretically a defense wall to keep the Scottish from invading the territory that the Roman Empire controlled south of the wall. The reality is it was more to control trade than it was actually as a defense wall, but it was built as a defense wall. And you'll see sections of the wall in numerous locations as we go through, because there's a lot of the wall still in existence today. Of course, a lot of it is totally destroyed, but the trek is actually to follow the path of the wall. And you will notice we travel that it's quite often on the high points of land, separating. So you'll find that we're on ridge lines a lot of the way. But as Wes pointed out, our first couple of days, and there was two of them, that he's mentioned only one, that we walked from Newcastle out to the east coast, partially along the original wall, partially along walkway. So we visited two different areas on the east coast, walking from Newcastle in 2 days before we started our official hike.
Yep. So we did arrive in Newcastle, and as Norm pointed out, we had a couple of extra days. One of those days, we went up to visit Whitley Bay. I didn't kind of include this in this presentation, and the others was day was South Shields. This picture is of the famous swing bridge in Newcastle. So that whole bridge can swing out of the way to allow river traffic to go up and down the Tyne.
Now, when they say swim, that's swing. That's actually incorrect. It swivels. You have to imagine that it is going to swivel around.
So on the first day where we went to South Shield, we visited the Segendunum Roman Fort and Museum at Wall's End. Wall's End's the official start of the hike, and it has a museum there, and you can kind of see the outline of the old fort below. And it's kind of near the mouth of the Tyne River, where it goes into the North Sea. And so we did walk all the way the South Seal. This is Norm at a bit of the old wall right at the Segnum Museum. And this is us on Hadrian Cycleway headed out to South Shields. Okay, and this is in South Shields at the Arberia South Shields Roman Fort, which was the Romans' fort at the mouth of the Tyne, and they had some nice recreations. You can see some of the old buildings here. This was set up like the old Roman days. You could see how the troops lived and how the captain lived. And you can see a bit of an outline of the fort.
One of the things that was quite interesting is that when you look at the barracks usually had 2 or 3 soldiers in it, maybe up to 4. But in the room themselves, they also had their horse. So the horses were in with the barracks. The theory is that they were under attack. They didn't have to go out and try to round up their horse. The horse was right there with them.
And this is me dipping my hand in the North Sea. And later you'll see I'm going to dip my hand in the Irish Sea at the end of the trek. So this was our first day where we were walking the official pathway from Newcastle to Carlisle, and this is a bit of the old wall right again at the walls, just near the Walls End Museum. So here we're at the start of our trek, again at Walls End, and starting in just at an official piece of the wall. So the first part of the walk we did was Walls End to Newburn, and it's basically along the Tyne. The old wall actually went inland from here, but the official pathway, they couldn't really, because Newcastle is kind of growing up around the wall, they couldn't really take you by the wall through Newcastle, so they just built the pathway by the River Tyne. And
this is the base of one of the walls. This is basically a view of one of the smaller walls. This is not the major one.
Right. This is actually day 2 where we walked from Newburn to East Wallhouses. And this is called Hedon on the Wall. And this was our first really good look at the wall again after we had left Walls End. And then we walked along something called the Military Road. It's a very, very straight road that crossed England and was kind of used by the Romans originally to move troops along the wall.
The military road actually followed the wall as well. So the wall is fairly close to the wall, and it was intended to move troops along the wall in need if there was a need of defense very quickly.
And this was East Wallhouses. That was the B&B we stayed in. You'll notice sheep. Sheep were definitely a theme along our walk. There were lots of sheep everywhere.
You will also notice that a lot of these houses, these farmhouses, have been built from the stones taken from Hadrian's Wall.
And this is a style for getting over one of the walls. This was quite typical for, as you walked along the wall for getting over different different fences and obstacles. Lots of farm animals. Another typical kind of walkway. They tried to keep you off the main roads as much as possible, so it kind of felt like you were walking in the countryside. This I believe is one of the Burton turret.
Yeah. The turret.
So this was walking from wall houses to Chester's Roman fort. That was typical of kind of one of the turrets that they had. This is at Chester's fort, which we visited. And you'll notice the phallic symbolism here in the rock. This is quite typical of Roman. They're always putting them up. And this is Chester's Fort, also known as Silurnum. And we had a really good tour here with a local tour guide who explained a lot about how the Roman fort worked and talked about how the wall was used to control, more than military, was really used to control a trade between the northern tribes and the southern lands. The southern lands were much more prosperous and had a lot more goods and services than the northern tribes had access to. Again, more of Chester's Fort. I think this might have been part of the old baths.
This was part of the bath, yep.
And another turret we had along the way. And I think we're now on kind of the part of the walkway from Chester's Roman fort to what they call Once Brewed, which is this little community that has a brewery at it. And I would say if you had limited time and you really wanted to spend a day or two getting familiar with Hadrian's Wall, this is probably the most famous bit of the wall that's left and the most scenic between Chester's Fort and Once Brewed. You're going to see, I believe, like the Black Turret, which we saw, and you're going to come along to one of more famous forts here. I think this is called the Homestead Fort.
Yeah.
They had a lot of interesting information here. And you're going to start to walk along the crag that separates this section of the wall from the northern lands. So the Romans followed basically a cliff line along to use it kind of as a natural part of the wall. You can see it here. You can see another old turret. And here you can see more of the cliff line. And below you're getting I believe it's the famous Bromley Low, which is the little lake below the cliff. Again, this probably is more a farmer's wall than Hadrian's Wall.
But it follows Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah. And a lot of Hadrian's Wall, by the way, did get used by farmers constructing walls, by people constructing castles and homes. They just would use the stones for their own purposes. Another section where you're walking near the cliffside and the wall.
You'll notice that there's a turret in that picture that you can see where the turret was still there, the base of it.
Yeah, and I think you can see Once Brewed down here in the distance. An old farmhouse, and this gives you much more a look at the crags that form part of the wall. Top of the crag there. And here Norm is coming to the most famous bit of the wall called Sycamore Gap, with this sycamore tree, which is quite famous. It was used in a movie I think it was called Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, that was filmed back in the 1990s with Kevin Costner, maybe. And there's Norm right by the famous sycamore.
if you only have a 1 day hike on Hadrian's Wall, this is the section you want to do. From Once Brewed through to this section here, Sycamore, and then you can walk back out again. But it's by far the most scenic of the historical wall that you're going to find.
Pictures of the Sycamore Gap. And more of the crags. Oh, so we ended that day going down into Once Brewed, and well, I'll also mention that this section has is quite near a famous fort called the Vindolanda Fort, and it's famous because they found these wooden tablets kind of preserved, I think, in the peat moss there, that they were able to still read, and so they're called the Vindolanda tablets, and they contained information about like the daily records and the daily commerce and information about gave them a lot of information about what daily life was like within a Roman fort. So unfortunately we met a couple that did put an extra day in just to go and visit that fort, and we were kind of sorry we missed it because it sounded like a very interesting place to visit. So the next day after we'd visited this section, we headed from Once Brewed to Gilfland.
Oh, just a second before you change the picture, you will notice, and maybe you've noticed already, that a lot of these slopes and walks, they actually had to put in slate steps because it just is so rough and you're climbing quite a bit. So it was easy going in the sense that you had good footing, but they built a lot of places with stairs, if you want to call slate steps the stairs.
You could see them coming all the way down there. And here we are at Windshield. They put a little cairn there to mark the highest point on the wall, which is 340 meters, about 1,100 feet above sea level. So we're quite
remember, we started at sea level.
Yeah, so we were quite glad to get there. And then we came down into Caw Gap, which has a watchtower and the ruin of Caulfield Mile Castle. It also was a quarry. It's now a lake and being converted into a park. And from there, we walked on to Walltown, Craig, and another quarry and a town, and visited this Roman Army Museum, where they really tried to bring to life what it was like to live in Roman days. So you can see they had interactive kind of exhibits about how it was like to live in the days of Hadrian. They gave you a chance, like Norm, to try out what it was like to use a Roman crossbow, and
I could tell you that spring-loaded was spring-loaded. It was not that easy to pull it full length.
And this was the one section after we came out of the Army Museum. It was the only time we really got quite a downpour of rain, and we walked in the rain onto Gilfland. I will mention sometimes we would reach destinations, and because of difficulties arranging accommodation there, the company we went with would just arrange for a taxi to come pick us up, and we'd end up going back to the hotel we were in the night before, and then in the morning we'd get a taxi back to our starting place. And this is from Giftland to Newton, and
this is one of the town parks. It was all set up like this. This is exactly a place to sit down and relax with some company and tea.
Right.
Yeah, like right.
And here again, we're walking along sections of the wall. And it was our luck that they had the Rats Race the Wall Ultra Marathon. It starts in Carlisle and ends in Newcastle, which is about over 100 kilometers. So these guys were attempting to run over 100 kilometers in one day. So it's quite the run, and we started to see them trickle by us. We were hiking in the opposite direction, but we'd see them going by, running on the roads and over ditches and through fields. It was quite interesting. We had our lunch in the little town of Walton at the Walton's Reading Room, which was quite cute. And we tried what they call the Palmen lunch, which is, I guess, quite common. Usually it has bread and cheese and pickles and stuff like that.
It was very good.
Norm decided some flowers in the village. Oh, and we got a chance to see a wedding that was taking place in Newton. And from Newton, we headed out to Carlisle. We didn't see a lot of the wall in this section. Most of it's gone. We eventually, a lot of farmers' fields. Eventually, we came to the River Eden. And we walked along that all the way in. This is the bridge in Carlisle. We got there quite early because it was a fairly short day. And we were able to spend the afternoon touring Carlisle Castle. In 1567, Mary Queen of Scots was briefly imprisoned here in the Warden's Tower. And this is just a few views of the castle in Carlisle. Our last day was going to be a long one. This was our longest day, which was 25 kilometers, all fairly flat. Took us about 6 hours. There are not too many sights to see until the end, kind of walking along the River Eden here. There's some communities, an old churchyard here.
It's is that a Mormon church? No.
No.
But anyways, it's a particular style of church, which is unique.
Yeah.
Horse.
And here, this section of the road, you actually are supposed to check your tide tables because this is getting near Solway. This is a huge kind of inlet that comes in off the Irish Sea. And in times of high tide, the road that Norm's on can actually be flooded. So you have to be careful about which times you head out on there.
You'll notice the mud flats in the back. Just on a regular full tide in, that's completely underwater. And the high tides, it could be over the road.
And here we are at the very end of the official end of Hadrian's Wall in Bowness on Solway. And later we found out when we went to dinner, our taxi driver said, oh, there's a very famous post here with different directions to different locations. I think it's in miles. And so he kindly gave us a ride back so we could take a picture at it. And that's his cute little taxi cab.
We had to have a picture of it. It's so traditional, London cab.
Right.
And the interesting thing is that where we went to eat dinner that evening, they provided the transportation. So if you went to there from our B&B, they sent the taxi, this one, to pick us up, took us there for our meal, and then at the end of the night would take us back to our B&B. But because the driver wanted to show us his end, he took it for a bit of a tour around. So we got to see a bit more country. It was very cool. And the taxi is an amazing thing to ride in.
And so that was basically the end of our trip on Hadrian's Wall, having gone about 150 kilometers from the North Sea to the Irish Sea. And then we faced challenges with the rail strike, just as Helen mentioned in her presentation. And this was just a picture of people at the train station. I'd actually bought bus tickets as a backup, just in case we weren't able to get on the train. Norm had left us an extra day in London, so we were before our flight out, but we were still quite concerned about getting back to London.
Remember that from here, we have two options. We could take a bus or we could take a train. I guess three options, or we could rent a car or pay a taxi, but it's quite a distance. So the trains actually were on a strike, but they were running about 2 trains a day. And we had pre-booked before we even left town, our tickets for the flight, for the train back. The train that we had booked, of course, with guaranteed seats, was immediately removed from service. So then we were like, oh my gosh, we don't know if we're going to get one. But we had made a contingency plans, which turns out we paid for bus tickets we never used, because when we got to the train station early, we discovered that we actually had no problem getting on because all the local people were not riding the train. So everyone who did not need to go anywhere stayed home. So we actually had lots of room on that one train because there was only 2 for the day. And we happened to catch the one train that we could get. And it worked well for us. We were fine.
There's now Norm standing outside the Carlisle
Looking
train
happy.
station. And here we're happily on the train, heading to London. We spent a couple of extra days in London, visited the London Zoo. It was
Well, okay, we've got a couple of minutes here. So we get back into London on the train, but now we have to get from the train station to the local tram or train, subway, to get out towards the airport where we had our B&B booked. We got on to, we had to find a way to get there on a bus that was running. We found it. We managed to work it out. We get to the tube. We get everything organized. We get our ticket. We get on the tube. We're sitting there ready to leave. A minute before it's supposed to go, they said, oh, this one's not going. It's been canceled. So everyone on the train, it was full, rushes out to find one that they could take that would get us where we wanted to go.
But it didn't quite.
But it didn't quite go. That one there only went about 75% of the way, and it stopped. And so then we had to get off of it and figure out, now how do we get from here to our B&B? And so we, figured a lot of strategy and stuff. We finally found a bus that was going that way, but it was a bus that was going in reverse. So instead of it being like a 15 or 20 minute bus ride, it became a 45-minute bus ride because we had to go in reverse and then figure out where we had to get off going in reverse. It was actually really good.
Fun.
It was, when it was all done, it was good. The momentary stresses existed, but we learned that I don't think we'd ever want to do that game show where you have to run all over the world, whatever it's called.
Amazing Race.
Amazing Race. No, that would not be for us. We didn't snipe at each other very much, but we did figure it out.
Okay.